It's easy to get applause here today. As in many such encounters, Robert pursued Charlotte until she caught him. Well done, both. And how appropriately you're starting out on your life together on the brink of a new millennium. I believe that that's a very good omen of things to come. And speaking of good omens, let me say that Charlotte's parents have said to me repeatedly how very pleased they are to welcome Robert as a new member of the family. So, on behalf of Derek and Daphne, allow me to welcome all of you here today and to convey their heartfelt thanks to all of you who made this day such a happy and a memorable one. It occurred to me as I began to write this that I've known Charlotte for about as long as I've known her parents. And in that time, I've had the pleasure of watching her grow up to be a loving daughter and a loyal sister, as well as a successful businesswoman, without any of the attendant duties and pains of parenthood. Speaking for her today is a bit like being given the honor of smashing a bottle of champagne on the bows of a ship that you had no hand in designing or building. I didn't mean to prepare you for the ship, Charlotte.
When the book comes
Charlotte often refers to me as her sugar daddy. I'm not quite sure why. It's true that I have dandled her on my knee once or twice, but not that often in the last week or so. And I suppose I have participated in her education by introducing her to a few good restaurants. I have, of course, encouraged her in the art of wine tasting now and again. And come to think of it, I do remember giving her one valuable piece of advice, and that was always to charge up lunch on expenses whenever possible. I'll never forget my first meeting with Charlotte. It was when she was a little girl of about 8 or 9, and she and her sister Elizabeth had come up to London with Daphne to visit Derek. And as it was lunchtime, Derek and I thought we'd take them to our local pub, which is where we normally went. And why shouldn't we, after all, introduce them to a bit of real London life? I recall that the weather was rather good, and we sat outside at one of those bench table affairs. We sat for about an hour chatting and sipping our drinks. I can't remember what little Charlotte had to drink. It was probably vintage champagne. But what I do remember is that she was very impressed by the fact that Derek and I appeared to work in the post office tower, which was just next to McCann Erickson, the agency where Derek and I did sometimes work, at least before lunch. Anyway, ever since that afternoon, for years after, Charlotte believed that all the glamorous advertising people worked in the post office tower.
I do.
Later, when Charlotte began to consider a career path, despite the shocking examples of Derek and myself, she expressed a desire to work in, yes, advertising. Daphne was, of course, absolutely stunned, because advertising was, after all, considered to be about as bad as acting was in the 17th century. Her parents had always hoped that Charlotte would take up some honest profession, but alas, it was not to be. Starting out with a summer job at Teleann, a decidedly louche sort of television establishment, run by a total madman, who to this day remains one of her dearest friends, Charlotte went quickly to the bad. After coming down from Oxford, and after a brief spell working as manager of the aforementioned Teleann, Charlotte finally got her wish, and to her parents' further horror, got a job at McCann Erickson, next to the post office tower where all the glamorous advertising people were. Still, it all turned out well in the end, because if she hadn't got into advertising, she might never have met her future husband, and we wouldn't all be here today having such a glorious time, so thank you. Mind you, it's a good thing that Charlotte did so well for herself in this vile trade, because ever since I've known her, she's had a great enthusiasm for the activity of spending money on objects of desire. Indeed, it's a little-known fact that her degree from Corpus is actually in advanced designer shopping.
Poor old Robert.
You can see me afterwards. I realised that Charlotte was destined for greatness when on a picnic once at Oxford, she recognised the brand of pâté de foie gras that I had brought. Charlotte's consuming interest began early in her life. Once at about the age of 5, while on a visit to her uncle, she watched with amazement as he dug potatoes from the garden.
True.
Rushing down the garden path to her parents, she told them in hushed tones about her uncle's peculiar habits. You won't believe where Uncle Morris keeps his potatoes. Charlotte, of course, assumed that all potatoes came washed and immaculately wrapped in clean plastic bags. As Charlotte grew from that innocent little girl into a dedicated consumer, her ideas about desirable objects underwent many changes. Vast amounts of books that she acquired are still very dear to her, but now I'm told that her collection of shoes, in their neat boxes, has aroused the interest and envy of the curator at the Imelda Marcos Museum. Her passion for designing shopping does not, I'm reliably told, extend to food. Food is something you go out to a restaurant to eat. The fridge is something you keep champagne and nail varnish. So I sincerely hope that the task of keeping the larder well stocked with food and drink supplies falls on Robert's capable shoulders. I said a moment ago that I realized early on that Charlotte was destined for greatness. Of course, that's easy to say now, but we all really did feel that she would achieve much in the world. The only person who was not totally convinced of that was Charlotte herself. Modest and self-deprecating as always, she seemed surprised when she was accepted at Oxford. Those of us who knew her were not surprised. Charlotte always seemed so full of ability. In the car on the way to start her first term at Corpus, she turned to her parents and asked, "Why am I going to where all the clever people go?" Well, the answer was obvious to us. Charlotte is a very clever young woman, and all of us who closely observed her achievements over the years expected nothing less from her. Charlotte's latest achievement, of course, being that of finding such a fine young man to be her partner.
Very good.
Which brings me to the part of my speech where carefully considered words of advice are offered to the newlyweds. I have only one or two. I think, for instance, that having a sense of humour is an overwhelming night. A sense of humour, by the way, a sense of humour, by the way, is the ability to laugh at your own jokes when your wife tells them. And marriage is a state that inspires humour as well as other emotions. As Billy Connolly once observed, marriage is a wonderful invention, but then so is the bicycle with repair kit. Very deep. Pamela Mason called marriage the first step towards divorce. And according to Groucho Marx, marriage is a great institution, but who wants to live in an institution? Charlotte and Robert, don't listen to those old cynics. Listen to your hearts. All of us here today are filled with hope that you both experienced for many, many years the very best sort of partnership there is. And my last word of advice is to be good friends to each other. Friendship will see you through a lot of difficulties. You've both shown exceptionally good judgment in choosing your parents and in choosing each other. I have total confidence in your future abilities to make the right choices in life. Another old cynic once said, "Love is a temporary insanity curable by marriage." But looking at the radiant bride and her handsome husband, it is obvious to me that they are neither insane, nor have they been cured of love, and may they never be. And now, honoured guests and friends, I'll ask you all to please stand, if you will, which you are doing mostly. Raise your glasses and drink with me a toast to the health, the happiness and the prosperity of the newlyweds. Long may they keep open house to three of the best friends they'll ever have. Life and laughter. Here's to Charlotte and Robert. God bless you. And a bit of scripted text. My darling, I never had a daughter, I never will. But if I ever did, I would want her to be exactly like you.
Very well said. Excellent. Very good.